Welcome back to Clarkenomics. It is time to talk about the production possibilities frontier. So in the last video, I discussed a situation where you were going to run a cold drink stand in your neighborhood, and you could either produce lemonade or limeade. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to take that concept and we're going to apply it to an entire country. And because we're selling fruit drinks, we're going to call the country in question Fruitopia. So there is a country called Fruitopia that only produces two goods, lemonade and limeade. And with all of their scarce land, all their labor, all their capital, both physical and human, they have to decide how to allocate all of these productive resources. So what do they grow? Do they grow lemons? Do they grow limes? They have to decide where to send their land, their labor, and their capital towards producing what. Now, in the previous video, we talked about a table of production possibilities for your neighborhood cold drink stand. We're going to take the exact same table and we're going to apply it to the country of Fruitopia with production options A, B, C, D, E, and F. The literal only difference is we're changing the scale from being about you in your neighborhood to being about an entire country. So I've just changed lemonade from gallons to billions of gallons and limeade from gallons to billions of gallons. So all of these numbers are the same. We're just scaling things up a little bit here. And so from this table of production possibilities, and by the way, there could again be production options that are not listed here. In between, for instance, 9, right? 9 billion gallons of lemonade and 0.5 billion gallons of limeade. So we've picked these 6 points, but there are many more. And we'll actually finally get to see all the rest of those points on this diagram. So Fruitopia's production possibilities frontier. We're looking at their production options. Now, of course, this is a little unrealistic because we're assuming that the country only produces two things, lemonade and limeade, but for now, just go with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to put lemonade produced on the y-axis, and again, we're measuring that in billions of gallons. And then on the x-axis, we're going to put limeade produced, billions of gallons. Does it matter which one goes where? No, not really. So you could switch them interchangeably. All that matters is the data points here. So looking at production option A, that would be right there, right? Look at that. So you've got on the lemonade axis, 10 billion gallons. On the limeade axis, 0 billion gallons. So point A has only lemonade, no limeade. And we could do point B. That would be right there, and all the other ones. So at any point along this line could be a production option, even though it's not necessarily listed in this table. There are all kinds of points between A and B, or B and C, and so on and so forth. The important thing to note is that all of these production options we're going to call efficient production options. In other words, this is a combination of lemonade and limeade that Fruitopia could produce if they're using all of their resources, their factors of production, their land, labor capital, to their fullest potential. So this line represents the limit of how much they could produce. So A is an efficient point. F is an efficient point, even though they look completely different. At A, it's only lemonade. At F, it's only limeade. D, C, they're all efficient points. Any point, even if it's like somewhere in between these two, is an efficient point of production. They're using all of their resources to the best of their potential. So that's really important to note. So we'll get rid of those. Now imagine, if you will, that there's a point outside of the production possibilities frontier. Let's call it point G. At point G, that would be producing 8 billion gallons of lemonade and at the same time 4 billion gallons of limeade. And I want to ask you, is this a possible point of production? The answer would be no. This is impossible. If this line represents the most they can possibly produce when they're using all of their resources to the fullest potential at this time, they can't do that. In fact, if they're producing 8 gallons of lemonade, they could only ever produce 1 gallon of limeade right there. If they're producing 4 gallons of limeade, they can only produce 2 gallons of lemonade. Again, measured in billions. So a point like this, where you have 8 billion gallons of lemonade and 4 billion gallons of limeade, is not possible. Well, what about this point, point H? Point H, you've got 4 billion gallons of lemonade and 1 billion gallons of limeade. Is point H possible? The answer to that question is yes. This point is possible, because if they're producing 4 gallons of lemonade, they could actually be producing 3 billion gallons of limeade. This point is possible, but it's not ideal. It's what's called underutilization. They're not using all of their resources to their fullest potential. Because again, like I said, if they're producing 4 billion gallons of lemonade and only 1 billion gallons of limeade, that's a waste. They could be producing more not just of one thing, but of both things. For instance, they could be here at point C, producing 6 billion gallons of lemonade and 2 billion gallons of limeade. They have better options to produce. So that's one thing that's interesting to note. Now, again, all of the points on this line are equally efficient to each other. Now, which is the best point on that line? A, C, D, F? We actually can't say. Even though at this point they're only producing lemonade, no limeade, or at this point only producing limeade, no lemonade, or at either of these points, C and D, it seems like a pretty even split. We actually cannot say that any one of those points is better or worse than any one of those other points because one, they're all equally efficient points of production. They're using all of their resources to the max potential. But two, we don't know what the people of the country prefer. If they prefer lemonade, they'd probably rather have a point like C or B or A. If they prefer limeade, they'd probably rather have a point like D or E or F. It depends on preferences. And since we're not given that information, we can't make any assumptions about it. So underutilizing, efficient, impossible right now. Now again, this does not all sound very realistic. Real countries produce more than just two products. So this is kind of more of a metaphorical kind of thing, right? So one of the expressions that economists like to use a lot is guns versus butter, guns and butter. And guns are meant to be representative of like military spending. So how much of a country's resources should it allocate towards military stuff versus butter, which represents consumer goods, things for the people. And so your more authoritarian countries tend to allocate their resources more towards military production, and your more democratic types of countries tend to allocate their resources more towards the production of consumer goods, represented by butter. Other times, it's capital versus consumer goods. Should a country focus on creating more physical capital, more tools to produce more? Or should we focus on producing consumer goods, things for the people, again, to use? One of those two things allows us to produce more. One of them is consumed and produces waste. So that's one of the questions that an economy has to answer. And so, how countries answer these questions have huge effects on human lives. If your country decides to allocate production towards military goods and not a lot for the people, it's going to matter quite a bit for your quality of living. And so that's an idea that we'll explore later when we're discussing different economic systems. But the production possibilities frontier summarizes some of these complex questions or simplifies them into a nice, tidy little model where a country only produces two things and has to make choices about how much of each of those two things to produce in a marginal way. Thanks for watching.